forced to marry a cowboy, but when she saw him, something unexpected happened. Growing up in a small town surrounded by wide fields and old wooden fences, she watched other girls dream about life beyond the town, about love stories that seemed to happen in movies, and adventures that seemed far away. But for Clara, life was dictated by traditions she never chose. Every corner of her town whispered rules, rules about family, obedience, and the expectations of marriage. And now, at the age of 19, those rules had finally caught up with her. She had heard the whispers for months. Her parents, kind but unyielding, had made their decision long before she could voice her own desires. A marriage had been arranged for her, as had been done in their family for generations. The groom, Eli, was a local cowboy who had grown up on a ranch not far from their town. Clara barely knew him, and the little she had heard painted a picture of a rough, serious man, someone who had spent years under the scorching sun, learning to control horses, mend fences, and work the land from sunrise to sunset. He was described as dependable and strong, the kind of man who could never understand the delicate dreams of a girl like her. Clara's stomach twisted as she thought about meeting him. She had imagined many possibilities in her mind. What if he was cruel? What if he was cold? What if he had no interest in kindness or laughter? The thought of living every day under someone else's authority, someone she did not know or love, filled her with a deep unease. Her parents tried to comfort her, telling her it was tradition, that Eli was a good man, that she would grow to love him. But no words could silence the storm inside her. The day of the meeting arrived with a bright morning sky that seemed almost cruel in its cheerfulness. Clara dressed carefully in a simple dress her mother had chosen, the fabric soft and flowing, but nothing could disguise the tension in her body. She felt her heart pounding as she adjusted her hair for what seemed like the 100th time, though she knew it would make little difference. Her mother squeezed her hand and whispered, "Be strong, my daughter. Everything will be all right." Clara nodded, forcing a small smile, but inside, a whirlwind of worry and fear continued to swirl. As she walked toward the small barn where Eli was waiting, her mind raced. She imagined meeting a man with piercing eyes and a stern expression, a man who might look at her as if she were nothing more than another obligation. The barn door creaked open, and she stepped inside, expecting to see a stranger who would decide her life in an instant. Instead, she froze for a moment, taken aback by the sight before her. Eli was there, tall and sturdy, with broad shoulders and strong hands that had clearly known hard work all their lives. But there was something in his eyes, a calmness, a quiet attentiveness that she hadn't expected. He looked at her with a neutral expression, neither harsh nor overly friendly, just watching her with a measured patience. His voice, when he finally spoke, was soft yet firm, not commanding, not harsh, just steady. "Hello, Clara," he said, and the simplicity of it made her heart skip. It was a greeting, not a judgment. Clara's initial fear began to soften slightly. She realized she had been expecting hostility, but instead she saw a man who seemed aware of her presence without threatening it. Still, anxiety clung to her like a shadow. She forced herself to smile and greet him back. "Hello, Eli," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. The next few minutes were filled with polite, careful conversation. Clara noticed how he spoke gently, how he seemed genuinely interested in knowing a little about her life without pressing too far. He asked about her family, about her small routines in town, and he listened intently, nodding in a way that suggested he valued her words. Clara felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe this wouldn't be as unbearable as she had imagined. Maybe, just maybe, the man she had been forced to marry could be more than a stranger. Still, her thoughts returned to the reality she could not ignore. Marriage, even with someone as seemingly kind as Eli, was not something she had chosen. It was a commitment she had not imagined for herself at this age, and the idea of leaving behind the freedom she had known, however small, felt suffocating. She wondered what her life would become. Would she be happy, or would she simply endure? As the day progressed, Clara found herself observing Eli more closely. He was patient, moving with an ease that only came from years of experience. He showed her around the ranch, pointing out the animals, the fences, and the small house he called home. Everything was new and foreign, but he spoke in a way that made it understandable, never condescending, never assuming she knew less because she was unfamiliar with ranch life. Clara realized that he had a respect for knowledge and skill, but also for people, and it unsettled her expectations. By the time the sun began to set, Clara felt an exhaustion that was both physical and emotional. She had walked across fields, touched the coarse texture of hay, and watched Eli handle cattle with skill that made her both nervous and impressed. Yet beneath it all, there was a growing curiosity, a tiny spark of interest in the man who had, so far, defied all her assumptions. She didn't know what the future held, and the uncertainty both terrified and intrigued her. That night, as she lay in the small room provided for her, Clara thought about the first impressions of Eli. She thought about the calmness in his voice, the steadiness in his eyes, and the patience he had shown. It was not love, not yet, but it was something that could grow. And for the first time since she had learned about this arranged marriage, she felt a small sense of hope, a fragile belief that perhaps, even in a life chosen by others, she could find moments of understanding, of connection, and maybe even happiness. Her mind wandered as she stared out the window at the wide open fields under the moonlight. The future was uncertain, but for the first time it did not feel entirely dark. She realized that sometimes the unknown was not only frightening, it could be an opportunity. Clara didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew that she had faced the first day and she had survived, and that, she thought, was a start. As sleep slowly claimed her, Clara whispered a quiet promise to herself. She would not let fear define her. She would approach this life, this forced marriage, with her own mind and heart open. Perhaps there was more to Eli than the hard exterior, more to life in this town than she had ever imagined. Perhaps, just perhaps, something unexpected was waiting for her, and she would meet it with courage. The morning after Clara's arrival at the ranch felt strange and unfamiliar. She woke up before the sun had fully risen, unsure of where she was for a brief moment. The quiet was different from her parents' home. There were no nearby neighbors, no distant sounds of carts or voices. Instead, she heard the soft rustling of wind across open land and the low sounds of animals waking up. It made her feel small, as if the world around her was much larger than she had ever known. She sat up slowly, her heart heavy but steady. Today would be her first real day living in this new place, with a man who was now her husband in name, even though her heart was still trying to understand what that meant. She dressed quietly, choosing simple clothes that would not stand out. When she stepped outside, the air was cool and fresh, carrying the smell of earth and grass. For a moment, she forgot her worries and simply breathed. Eli was already awake. She saw him near the barn, moving calmly as he worked. He noticed her presence but didn't rush toward her or call out loudly. Instead, he gave her a small nod, as if to say good morning without words. Clara appreciated that. She still felt shy and unsure, and his quiet respect gave her space to settle into the day. Breakfast was simple. They sat across from each other at a wooden table, the silence filled only by small sounds, the clink of a cup, the scrape of a chair. Clara felt awkward at first, unsure if she should speak. Finally, Eli broke the silence gently. "You don't have to do anything today if you don't want to," he said. "It's a lot to take in." Clara looked up, surprised. She had expected to be told what to do, where to go, how to act. Instead, she heard understanding in his voice. "I'd like to help," she replied carefully. "I just don't know how." "That's all right," Eli said. "Everyone starts somewhere." After breakfast, he showed her around slowly, explaining things without making her feel foolish. He pointed out where supplies were kept, where animals rested, and which areas were better left alone for now. Clara listened closely, asking questions when she felt brave enough. She noticed how he never laughed at her questions or rushed his answers. That made her feel more comfortable than she expected. As the day moved on, Clara tried helping with small tasks. Some were harder than she imagined. Carrying water took more strength than she had, and she stumbled once, nearly spilling it all. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but Eli stepped in quietly, helping her steady the bucket without a word of criticism. "Take your time," he said. "There's no race." Those words stayed with her. No race. She realized how often her life had felt like one, rushing to meet expectations, to become what others wanted. Here, for the first time, someone was telling her it was okay to move at her own pace. Later that afternoon, as the sun grew warmer, Clara sat near the fence watching the land stretch out endlessly. It was both beautiful and intimidating. Eli joined her after a while, sitting a short distance away, giving her space. They talked about small things, weather, animals, simple routines. Then, without planning to, Clara spoke. "I was scared," she admitted softly, "about coming here." Eli nodded, not surprised. "I figured." "Why didn't you seem angry?" she asked. "About everything." He thought for a moment. "Because this wasn't your choice," he said, "and it wasn't fully mine either. That doesn't mean we should make it harder than it already is." His honesty struck her deeply. She had expected pride or control, not understanding. In that moment, she realized that Eli wasn't trying to own her future. He was simply trying to live his own life without causing harm. As evening approached, clouds gathered and the wind picked up. Clara felt uneasy as the sky darkened. She had never experienced a strong storm out in open land before. When the first distant sound of thunder rolled across the fields, she flinched. Eli noticed immediately. "It'll pass," he said calmly, "but we should get things secured." Clara followed him as best she could, watching how he moved with confidence and purpose. He gave her small tasks, nothing overwhelming, and guided her with clear words. Even as the storm grew louder, she felt oddly safe. His calmness didn't erase her fear, but it steadied it. When the rain finally came, it was heavy and fast. They hurried inside, slightly wet but unharmed. Clara laughed softly, surprised by herself. She hadn't laughed like that in days. Eli smiled briefly, as if pleased to hear it. That night they sat near the window, listening to the rain. There was no pressure to speak, no expectation of closeness beyond comfort. Clara realized something important then. Eli wasn't forcing her into anything. Not words, not actions, not emotions. He was letting trust form naturally. As she prepared for sleep, Clara reflected on the day. It had been tiring, confusing, and full of emotions she didn't fully understand. But it hadn't been frightening in the way she feared. Instead of control, she had found patience. Instead of coldness, she had found quiet care. Lying in bed, she thought about how her idea of a cowboy had been shaped by stories and assumptions. Eli was not loud or harsh. He didn't demand obedience or expect perfection. He worked hard, spoke honestly, and treated her like a person, not a burden. She still didn't know what the future held. Love was a distant thought, one she wasn't ready to explore. But respect, that was already there. And maybe, she thought as sleep came slowly, respect was a stronger beginning than she had ever imagined. Outside, the storm faded, leaving the land quiet once more. Clara drifted into sleep with a feeling she hadn't expected so soon, a sense of calm. For the first time since her life had been decided by others, she felt like she was standing on steady ground, even if the path ahead was still unclear. And somewhere deep inside her, a small voice whispered that something was changing. Not suddenly, not loudly, but gently, like the rain washing dust from the earth, making room for new growth. The days at the ranch began to feel more real, more demanding, and yet strangely more alive than anything Clara had experienced in her life before. She woke with the sun each morning, the golden light spilling across the wide fields and warming her face in a way that felt both gentle and insistent. Life on the ranch was not easy. Every task required attention, strength, and patience. Clara's hands grew rougher with each chore. Her arms tired from lifting water buckets and feeding animals. Her legs sore from walking across uneven ground. And yet, there was something satisfying in the work, a sense of accomplishment that had been missing from her quiet life in the town. Eli continued to watch her closely, not to judge or criticize, but to guide her. He had a way of noticing the small struggles, the awkward movements, the moments when she faltered, and correcting them without making her feel incapable. Clara learned quickly that he valued effort more than perfection. If she spilled water, he simply showed her a steadier way to carry the bucket. If she struggled with tying knots or handling the horses, he demonstrated once and then stepped back, letting her try on her own. It was a patience she had never expected in a man who had been described to her as gruff and unyielding. One morning, as they were working in the barn, a problem arose that tested both her courage and Eli's quiet strength. One of the calves had slipped its tether and was struggling, its small hooves kicking against the wooden posts in panic. Clara froze for a moment, unsure how to help without making things worse. The animal's fear was contagious, and her own heart raced in response. Eli, noticing her hesitation, approached calmly and placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said softly. "We'll do this together." He guided her step by step, explaining how to approach the calf, how to speak softly so it wouldn't panic further, and how to secure it gently. Clara followed his instructions, her hands trembling but steadying as she moved closer to the animal. Slowly, carefully, they managed to calm the calf and secure it. Clara's relief was overwhelming, and she laughed softly, almost in disbelief at her own bravery. Eli smiled, not with arrogance but with quiet pride. "You did well," he said simply. Those 3 words, so easy for him to say, felt like a small victory to her, a mark of her growing confidence. As the week progressed, Clara began noticing more of Eli's character. He was quiet, yes, but he had a presence that drew people in without force. He didn't speak unnecessarily, but when he did, it was with intention. He worked tirelessly, not because he wanted recognition, but because he respected the land, the animals, and the life he had built. Clara found herself admiring him quietly, realizing that strength wasn't always loud or visible. It could be calm, steady, and dependable. Despite her growing respect for him, Clara also felt moments of frustration. Life on the ranch was exhausting, and she missed the familiarity of her home. She missed her friends, the small routines she had taken for granted, the ease of knowing her place in the world. There were evenings when she felt overwhelmed, when the silence of the wide fields pressed down on her, making her feel small and lonely. In those moments, she would retreat to her room, sitting by the window and watching the stars, wondering if she would ever truly belong in this new life. Eli seemed to understand those moments as well. He never forced her to talk or explain herself, but he was always present when she needed him. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, he brought her a small cup of tea and sat quietly across from her. "You're doing better than you think," he said gently. Clara looked at him, surprised by the simplicity of his words. They weren't a lecture, a command, or a judgment. They were an acknowledgement of her effort, a recognition that mattered more than she could express. It was during a late afternoon, while tending to the horses in the open field, that Clara began to see a side of Eli that truly unsettled her assumptions. One of the older horses had injured its leg, and while Clara panicked, unsure of what to do, Eli approached with a calm she couldn't imitate. He spoke softly to the horse, soothing it with patience, and then carefully guided it to a safe space. Watching him, Clara realized that his strength was not just in his hands, but in his heart. He had empathy, the ability to understand and act without causing harm, and that was a quality she had not expected in someone who had been described to her as rugged and unyielding. Their connection began to grow slowly, like a small flame in the wind, fragile yet persistent. Clara found herself looking forward to the moments they spent together, whether it was tending to animals, walking across the fields, or simply sitting in silence, listening to the wind and the distant calls of birds. She noticed the way he moved, the small gestures of kindness he showed not just to her, but to the land and the animals he cared for. It made her reconsider the life she had dreaded, the man she had feared, and the possibilities she had dismissed too quickly. One evening, a small accident tested their budding connection. Clara had been carrying a basket of feed to the chicken coop when she tripped over a loose plank. The basket fell, scattering grain across the ground, and Clara felt a wave of embarrassment and frustration. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to hide her clumsiness, but before she could move, Eli appeared beside her. Without scolding, without anger, he helped her gather the feed. "It's all right," he said. "Mistakes happen. What matters is that we fix them." Clara felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of relief she had not expected. The fear of judgment, of being scolded or looked down upon, had always been present in her life. Yet here, in this new place, with this man she barely knew, she felt acceptance. Not blind acceptance, but understanding, patience, and guidance. She realized that the life she feared might not be as harsh as she had imagined. There was room for growth, for learning, and even for small moments of joy. As the days passed, Clara's confidence grew. She became more skilled with the chores, learned to anticipate the needs of the animals, and began to understand the rhythm of life on the ranch. She even started to enjoy some parts of it. The sound of the wind in the grass, the quiet moments in the early morning, the satisfaction of completing tasks she had once thought impossible. And through it all, Eli remained a steady presence, neither overbearing nor distant, allowing her space while offering support whenever it was needed. Their relationship, still undefined, continued to develop in subtle ways. Clara noticed small acts of thoughtfulness, a hand offered when she struggled, a word of encouragement when she doubted herself, the way he waited patiently while she learned, never rushing, never pushing. She began to see him not just as her husband by arrangement, but as a man with depth, patience, and kindness. And although she did not yet feel love, she recognized the beginnings of trust and respect, the foundations upon which something stronger might one day grow. One afternoon, as they rested by a creek after a long morning of work, Clara spoke quietly, almost to herself. "I didn't think I could do any of this," she admitted, looking down at the water. Eli sat beside her, silent for a moment, then replied gently, "You're stronger than you know. It's just a matter of giving yourself time." Clara looked at him, surprised by the truth in his words. She had felt so powerless, so trapped by circumstance, yet here she was, learning, growing, surviving, and even beginning to feel a small sense of accomplishment. Eli's quiet faith in her abilities made her see herself in a new light. Perhaps this life, though unchosen, could still be a life worth living. Perhaps this man, though unexpected, could be more than a stranger. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Clara felt a mixture of exhaustion and wonder. She realized that life on the ranch, though difficult, had given her a sense of purpose she had never known. She had faced challenges, learned new skills, and discovered resilience she had not realized she possessed. And through it all, Eli had been there, not as a master, not as a critic, but as a guide, a partner, and a quiet presence she could rely on. Lying in bed that night, Clara reflected on the changes within herself. She had arrived at the ranch afraid, anxious, and resentful, expecting a life of obligation and hardship. Instead, she had found a man who was patient and kind, a life that was demanding yet rewarding, and a sense of inner strength she had never known. She did not yet know what tomorrow would bring, but she felt a growing curiosity, a hope that she could meet the future with courage, resilience, and even a sense of quiet joy. For the first time, Clara realized that life could surprise her. She had expected fear, resistance, and loneliness. Instead, she had found understanding, guidance, and the beginnings of trust. And though love was not yet present, she understood that trust and respect were the first steps toward something deeper. And so, as sleep slowly embraced her, Clara felt a quiet determination. She would face the challenges of the ranch, the expectations of her new life, and the unknown future with an open heart. She did not know what would come, but she felt ready to learn, ready to grow, and perhaps ready to discover something beautiful in the life she had once dreaded. The days at the ranch had begun to feel almost normal to Clara, though nothing about this life was ordinary. She had grown stronger, more confident, and she had learned to anticipate the needs of the animals, handle chores efficiently, and even ride the horses across open fields. And yet, despite her growing skills, she knew life here could still test her in ways she hadn't imagined. One evening, a sudden storm made that truth impossible to ignore. It began quietly enough, with dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Clara, who had been tending to the horses, noticed the change immediately. The wind picked up, whipping through the fields and tugging at her hair. Eli had already sensed it and was moving quickly to secure the animals. "Come on," he called, and Clara hurried after him, trying to match his pace despite the nervous flutter in her chest. By the time they reached the barn, the storm had grown fierce. Rain lashed against the wooden roof, and the distant rumble of thunder shook the air. Clara had never experienced anything like it. Her hands trembled as she helped gather the smaller animals into safer areas, and the older horses were restless, shifting nervously in their stalls. She felt panic rising, but every time she looked at Eli, his calm, steady presence reminded her to breathe. "Focus on one thing at a time," he instructed. "The animals first, then we'll secure the barn." Following his guidance, Clara moved with more purpose. She held a frightened goat as Eli fastened the stall doors, speaking to the animals softly, his voice steady and reassuring. Clara found herself imitating his tone, realizing how much she had absorbed just by watching him. For the first time, she felt more like a partner than a novice, someone who could contribute meaningfully rather than simply observing. The storm raged for hours. Clara and Eli worked side by side, drenched, exhausted, yet unwavering. Each task, from securing the barn to checking the animals' water and food, became a lesson in resilience. Clara felt a strange pride in herself. She had feared the storm, feared the responsibility, and yet here she was, facing it with determination. And beside her was Eli, patient, strong, and quietly encouraging, never taking over completely but guiding her when needed. During a brief pause, they stood under the lean-to, sheltering from the rain. Clara was shaking, partly from the cold and partly from the adrenaline of the moment. Eli noticed and handed her a dry towel. "You're doing really well," he said simply. Clara met his gaze, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was acknowledgement, recognition of her courage, her effort, and her growth. It made her heart beat faster in a way she didn't fully understand. As the storm eased, the two of them began inspecting the damage. A few fences had collapsed, and one of the smaller animals had scratched its leg in panic. Clara felt her nerves tighten at the sight of the injuries, but Eli approached her quietly. "We can fix this," he said. "We'll do it together." Under his guidance, she helped mend the fences and treat the injured animal. She discovered a strength and patience she had never known. Her hands, once clumsy and hesitant, now moved with purpose. She felt a sense of accomplishment that was entirely new to her. She realized that this life, which had once seemed impossible, was teaching her more than any lesson from books or school could have. It was teaching her resilience, responsibility, and courage. By the time they finished, the storm had passed completely. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of wet earth and grass, and the sunset painted the fields in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Clara looked at the ranch, at the animals now safe and settled, and she felt a sense of pride and belonging. Eli stood beside her, silent, watching the sunset as well. Clara realized that she trusted him more than she had expected. She trusted his guidance, his judgment, and even his calm presence. That night, as they ate a simple dinner together, Clara noticed a shift in her feelings toward Eli. She no longer saw him solely as the man her parents had chosen for her. She saw a human being, someone with kindness, patience, and strength, someone who could teach her, guide her, and support her without demanding or controlling her. She realized that perhaps this forced marriage could become something more than obligation. Perhaps it could become a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. The next few days were quieter, but Clara found herself replaying the storm in her mind. She reflected on the moments when fear had threatened to overwhelm her, and how she had pushed through it, largely because of Eli's calm guidance. It was a turning point, she realized, not because the storm had passed, but because she had survived it, and she had done so alongside someone who did not belittle her fear but helped her face it. Eli, too, seemed to acknowledge a subtle change. He was quieter around her in a different way, not distant, but attentive. He watched her with a gentleness that suggested he had noticed her growth, her determination, and her courage. They didn't speak about feelings or emotions directly, but their shared experiences during the storm had created a silent understanding. A bond had begun to form, not through words, but through shared challenges and mutual respect. One afternoon, as Clara worked in the vegetable garden, Eli approached with a small basket of fresh eggs. He handed them to her with a soft smile. "I thought you could use these," he said. Clara felt a warmth in her chest at the simple gesture. It was more than eggs. It was a recognition of her presence, her contribution, and the life she was beginning to build here. She looked at him, unsure how to respond. Words felt inadequate. Instead, she simply smiled, feeling a quiet gratitude she had never expected. "Thank you," she said softly. It was a small exchange, yet it carried more meaning than she could fully articulate. She realized that connection, like trust, often began with small moments, gestures of kindness, shared effort, and quiet understanding. Later that evening, Clara found herself sitting on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the dark sky. She reflected on the past few weeks, the fear, the adjustment, the challenges, and the moments of unexpected comfort. She realized that her feelings toward Eli had shifted. She didn't yet feel love, but she felt respect, trust, and even a budding admiration. She recognized that her assumptions about him had been wrong. He was not the harsh, unfeeling man she had imagined. He was patient, capable, and quietly strong in ways she had never anticipated. Eli joined her on the porch without speaking, simply sitting nearby. Clara felt a sense of calm in his presence, a reassurance that didn't require words. They watched the sky together, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. It was a moment of peace that Clara had not known she could experience here, a feeling of being safe, accepted, and seen. As the night grew darker, Clara thought about the future. She still had fears, uncertainties, and challenges ahead. Life on the ranch was demanding, and she knew there would be moments of frustration, exhaustion, and doubt. But she also knew that she was not alone. She had someone beside her who could guide, support, and encourage her without judgment. That realization brought a quiet hope she had not felt in a long time. Lying in bed that night, Clara reflected on the storm, the work, and the small moments that had shaped her days. She realized that life on the ranch, though unexpected and challenging, had given her more than she had anticipated. It had given her strength, resilience, and a sense of purpose. It had also given her the first glimpse of what it meant to be seen and respected by another human being. And in the quiet moments before sleep claimed her, Clara understood something important. that life could surprise her in ways she had never imagined. She had arrived at the ranch fearful, unsure, and resistant, expecting hardship and loneliness. Instead, she had found growth, understanding, and the beginnings of a connection she could not have foreseen. The forced marriage, once a source of dread, had become a space where she could learn, adapt, and even begin to trust, not only Eli but herself. As she drifted into sleep, Clara felt a small, persistent hope. The storm had passed, the challenges of the day had been met, and she had emerged stronger, braver, and more capable than she had believed possible. And somewhere deep inside, she sensed that her life was beginning to change in ways she could not yet fully comprehend, that the man she had once feared might one day become someone she could rely on, respect, and perhaps even care for. The days that followed the storm felt different to Clara. She woke each morning with a sense of quiet determination, a new confidence in her step, and a growing awareness of how much she had changed since arriving at the ranch. The tasks that once seemed impossible now felt manageable. She could feed the animals, mend fences, and even ride the horses across the open fields with a steady hand. Her body ached less from the work, and her mind felt sharper, more attuned to the rhythm of life here. Yet it was not just skill or strength that had grown within her, it was something deeper: patience, understanding, and a sense of belonging she had never thought possible. Eli noticed the change too. He no longer gave instructions as often as he had at first, instead allowing Clara to take the lead on many tasks. He observed quietly, stepping in only when necessary, offering guidance that was gentle and encouraging. There was a subtle shift in the air between them, one that Clara felt in her chest as she moved about the ranch. She realized that she was no longer simply following his lead out of fear or obligation. She was learning, growing, and even beginning to enjoy the life they shared. One morning, Clara woke to a bright, clear day. The sky was a brilliant blue, dotted with soft clouds, and the air smelled sweet with fresh grass and wildflowers. She stepped outside to tend to the animals, feeling a rare sense of peace. The animals greeted her with familiar sounds: the lowing of cows, the clucking of chickens, and the soft whinnies of horses. Clara smiled, realizing that these sounds no longer felt foreign or intimidating. They were part of the rhythm of her life now, and she felt a quiet pride in being able to care for them. Eli joined her shortly after, carrying tools for repairs he had planned for the morning. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and steady. Clara returned the greeting, and for a moment they simply stood together, watching the sunlight filter across the fields. It was a comfortable silence, one that spoke volumes without words. As the day progressed, they worked side by side, repairing fences, feeding animals, and preparing for the next season of planting. Clara felt a sense of ease she had never known before. She could laugh freely, make small jokes, and even tease Eli lightly about his stubbornness with the horses. He responded with quiet amusement, his expression softening in ways that made her heart feel unexpectedly warm. In the afternoon, they took a break near the creek that ran along the edge of the ranch. Clara dipped her hand into the cool water, letting it run over her fingers, and watched as the sunlight danced across the surface. Eli sat nearby, observing her with a look that was thoughtful but gentle. Clara felt a flutter of curiosity and something else, a feeling she was not yet ready to name, but one that made her heart beat a little faster. "You've grown a lot since you arrived," Eli said quietly. Clara looked at him, surprised by the acknowledgement. "I didn't know I could learn all this," she admitted softly. "I didn't think I was capable." Eli shook his head slightly. "You always were," he said. "You just didn't realize it yet." His words struck her deeply. It wasn't just about the chores or the work. It was about her as a person, her courage, and her ability to face challenges she had never imagined. She felt a warmth in her chest, a recognition of her own strength that had been hidden for so long. As evening approached, Clara prepared a small dinner while Eli tended to the animals one last time for the day. She moved around the kitchen with confidence, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and setting the table. The rhythm of the work was soothing, almost meditative, and she realized that she had come to enjoy the simplicity of these moments, the quiet, the steady pace, and the satisfaction of completing tasks with care. When dinner was ready, Eli joined her, and they ate together, sharing stories of their days and laughter over small mistakes or mishaps. Clara realized that she felt a sense of companionship she had never expected. She no longer viewed Eli solely as the man her parents had chosen for her. She saw him as a partner, someone who respected her, encouraged her, and shared the burdens and joys of life on the ranch. After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Clara felt a wave of contentment wash over her, a quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She realized that the fear and resistance she had carried since her parents told her about the marriage had faded. In its place was trust, respect, and a tentative sense of affection that surprised her. Eli broke the silence gently. "You've adapted well," he said. "I'm proud of you." Clara felt her cheeks warm. She had expected praise for accomplishments in chores or learning tasks, but his words felt different. They acknowledged her as a person, not just her work. "Thank you," she said softly, and for a moment they simply watched the sky together, comfortable in the quiet companionship. The days that followed continued to build on this foundation. Clara and Eli faced challenges: an injured animal, a broken fence, unexpected rain, but each obstacle brought them closer. They learned to rely on each other's strengths, to communicate without words, and to support one another in practical and meaningful ways. Clara realized that trust was being formed, slowly but surely, and that the bond between them was deepening in ways she had never anticipated. One particularly quiet evening, Clara found herself sitting near the barn, watching the horses graze. Eli approached, carrying a small bundle of fresh hay. He set it down gently and sat beside her. "You've changed a lot since you arrived," he said, "not just in what you can do, but in who you are." Clara looked at him, unsure how to respond. The truth in his words touched her deeply. She had felt fear, doubt, and resistance when she first came to the ranch, but now she felt strength, confidence, and a sense of place. "I've learned a lot," she admitted softly. "More than I ever thought I could." Eli nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And you'll keep learning," he said. "Life has a way of teaching us things we never expected, if we're willing to pay attention." Clara smiled, feeling a quiet gratitude for the lessons, the experiences, and even for Eli himself. As the night grew darker, they walked together to check on the animals one last time. The moonlight reflected on the fields, casting long shadows and giving the world a serene, almost magical quality. Clara felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She realized that she had grown to care for this life, for the ranch, and even in small, careful ways, for the man who had once seemed so unknown and distant. Returning to the house, they settled near the fireplace. The warmth of the fire, the quiet crackle of burning wood, and the sense of shared accomplishment created a feeling of comfort and belonging. Clara realized that this life, once imposed upon her, had become a space where she could thrive, learn, and even begin to find happiness. Eli glanced at her quietly. "You've become strong," he said, "not just in body but in spirit." Clara felt her heart swell with a mixture of pride and humility. She had doubted herself for so long, worried that she would never measure up or find a place in this new life. Yet here she was, capable, resilient, and growing more confident each day. "I didn't know I could," she whispered, "but I see now that I can." Eli reached out and placed a hand gently on hers. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried warmth, reassurance, and a quiet acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. Clara felt a surge of emotion, a recognition of trust, respect, and something more that was beginning to bloom between them. The next morning, Clara awoke with the sun casting a golden glow across her room. She felt a sense of clarity she had never known. She was no longer defined solely by the fear of obligation or the weight of expectation. She had discovered courage, resilience, and even moments of joy in the life she had once dreaded. And she had discovered a man, Eli, who, through patience, kindness, and quiet strength, had become more than a stranger. As she stepped outside, the field stretched before her, alive with the sounds of animals and the gentle sway of grass in the morning breeze. Clara felt a deep, abiding sense of connection, not only to the land and the life she was building, but also to the man who had guided her, supported her, and quietly shared this journey with her. Over time, Clara realized that the forced marriage that had once filled her with dread had transformed into something unexpected. It was not just a bond of obligation, but a relationship built on trust, respect, shared experience, and the beginnings of affection. She did not yet fully understand all her feelings, but she knew one thing with certainty. She had grown stronger, braver, and more capable than she had ever imagined. And she had found a partner in Eli, a man whose patience, kindness, and quiet strength had helped her discover the best parts of herself. As the sun set over the ranch that evening, casting long shadows across the fields and bathing the world in a warm, golden light, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and hardship, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more open to the possibilities of life. She knew that challenges would continue to come, but she also knew that she was ready to meet them, with courage, resilience, and a heart open to unexpected connections and the quiet, steady growth of love. And in that moment, standing beside Eli and watching the sun disappear beyond the horizon, Clara understood something she had never believed possible when she first arrived at the ranch. Life, even when forced upon us, can surprise us in the most beautiful and unexpected ways. It can teach us strength, patience, and trust. It can guide us toward connection, understanding, and even love. And it can show us that sometimes, the life we fear the most may turn out to be the life we were meant to embrace all along.